All righty. It is July 25th. It's Saturday, and we are staying consistent. And so thank you for everyone that keeps following us on this journey. We really are excited to do this. Jesse, it's great to see you as always. I'm super excited about this show. Yes, I always say that. I get it, but I really am. I'm excited each week because here's the reality is I wouldn't bring people on if I wasn't excited about it. What kind of sense would that make? So I am super excited to bring in the guest for today, Mike Veny. For those of you that don't know Mike, get to know him. He's got a website. He's an author. He's a fellow TED speaker. He is a drummer. He is an incredible human being that has found a unique way to stand in his truth, to serve and help other people. And that's exactly what we do. And that's why I feel like we're so aligned. We just were introduced to each other last week, believe it or not, by Jen McShane, who introduces me to all kinds of incredible people. So we're very grateful for you, Jen. And I know it was like a friend of a friend and all that, but either way, I'm super happy it happened. And I don't know. I'm really excited because as I started looking into him, we just had a phone call yesterday. It was the first time we talked on the phone. And of course, he's in New York and I'm from New York originally. I get that we have shoddy service out there. And so it kept cutting out and we tried like 3 times. And then this dude sent he took a personal video of himself to be like, this is the best we can do, and sent it to me. And so it's been great. We're one day into our relationship, but I'm super excited to meet you, Mike, albeit virtually. And yeah, I'm just happy to have you on the show, man. Jesse, what's happening?
I'm excited to be here too. And so when you told me that who we had on the show this week, of course, we're going to look him up and see what's going on because you spoke very highly of him and you sounded excited. So I looked into it and I am honored to have him on. I think it's going to be a great conversation. And this guy, I'm going to let him speak for himself. But I think what's some of the most powerful things is when people have a story and they share it, you can transform lives. And I think that's what he's really figured out and been able to do. So I want to welcome him on. Thanks for being here, Mike.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you to the both of you, and hello to your viewers out there. I'm excited to be here. That was possibly the best intro ever. So I think I need to have the two of you with me wherever I go to do presentations or live streams like this.
We can be your hype man, right? Entering now at 6'7". I don't know how tall you are, Mike. I'm just getting.
You can make me taller. I love it.
The hey song going. Yeah.
The drummer beat going. Anyway, yeah. All right. So let's get into this, okay? Because otherwise we're just having fun and people are offended by that. So I'm kidding. I'm curious, Mike. We just provided a 30,000 foot overview. Jesse kind of teased this story that you have and how you're helping people. Again, everyone, I believe your website is just mikeveny.com, right? And Veny is Veny, for those of you that are wondering.
Thank you for getting it right.
Of course. I even saw you had like the breakdown, like VEE hyphen. I think you even had KNEE, like VE. Yeah. So yeah. He's got a ton of content online. He has an incredible YouTube channel. He provides online webinars. Again, he has a book called Transforming Stigma that we'll talk about. He's got a TEDx talk that he did 5-6 years ago and talking about his mental health and how it is an asset, not a liability. Right, Mike?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. And, I have so much to say on that. And thank you for bringing this up, because one of the things that I've learned is that when we talk about mental health, it's a tough subject. A lot of people might not be tuning in today because it's like, okay, this is too heavy and I don't want to deal with this. And I want to say something I learned is that mental health challenges are confusing, complex, and frustrating. You can't put them into one box. And I share this story that years ago I was working out in the gym. And I was doing push-ups, one of those push-up routines where you put your hands in different positions. And I ended up hurting my wrist. I was trying to impress some girl in the gym. And I quickly played it off, got out of the gym, and went home and iced my wrist. And I knew it's either a sprain, a strain, or a broken wrist. Wait a few days. If it's not better, call a doctor. Mental health doesn't work that way. It's typically someone discovers something in your behavior, and it's not a good discovery, and it's a usually ugly confrontation. And so for me, I've been struggling my whole life with mental health challenges. That's all I know is psychiatrists and psychologists. It started for me in fourth grade. And basically throughout my youth, I had been expelled from 3 schools for behavior problems. I had been in the mental hospital 3 times because of my angry outbursts. And I was suicidal. I attempted to die by suicide at age 10 because I just wanted the pain to go away. And if you think about what I just said before, mental health challenges are confusing and complex, especially when you're a kid. So a lot of times, if you're a young person, there's no way to articulate what's going on because it's just so overwhelming. And so basically the thing that changed my life was drumming. Drumming, I'll never forget holding drumsticks for the first time. It feels so good. And that actually was the thing that centered me and got me to feel better and became my career for many years. And nowadays I still do drumming pre-pandemic and post-pandemic.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, Mike. And I think it's such an important piece for people to understand, especially when you're looking at what's happening right now with most all kids getting, their school year ended early and had to go into homeschooling. And now there's all this confusion and debate about returning back to school. And is it going to be virtual or is it going to be in person? But beyond that, when we talk specific to children's mental health, we have to understand that it looks different than it does in adults. Oftentimes, when we're talking about kids, especially in depression, they act out and it gets misidentified as a behavioral issue, or they're oppositional defiant, or, we peg all these things and we see them as a problem child, and they get labeled very, very quickly based on their behaviors. But if somebody would just take enough time, energy, effort, I get that it also takes education, to just peel back the layer a little bit and say, why is that behavior happening? And what you would discover more often than not is that is the child suffering from depression. But kids haven't learned, well, I feel like they've been pushed away from being encouraged or supported to emote or express themselves emotionally. And so they don't know, because it is confusing, complex, and frustrating as a kid, just as Mike said. And so, yeah, it's like, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do except for implode, and it's going to come out some way. And so it usually comes out in ways that are misidentified as behavioral issues. And so I just hope that people understand that. If you have a child who is acting out or seems angry or is mad about things, don't just focus on the behavior, focus on the why behind the behavior. And then you'll realize that maybe that you're dealing with a depressed child. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of make that point on the back of what Mike just said.
Oh, thank you.
And furthermore, right? Like that's the emotional side in dealing with the child, right? Let's say they have a good support system. Let's say they have someone that just gets them into care. It's still not easy. I mean, we talk about challenges, right? As a child grows, their biochemistry changes. So they might be on a particular medical, prescription plan, or they might be on a specific medical medicine regimen. And then all of a sudden it stops working, right? Their biochemistry changes. They're changing. They're kids. They go through particular stressors differently than we do, right? So the challenges for treating children with mental illness is even more challenging. And I know that can be frustrating for a lot of parents and families, and especially the child. And like Joe mentioned, right, there's a big debate. Should they go back to school or not? What happens? And I find that the people that aren't even part of the debate are the kids themselves, right?
Interesting, right?
Yeah. Everyone's kind of deciding what they think is best, and we don't hear from them. But I really, really like your story, man. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, thank you. And to go with, what you just said, you said that things change with kids, but guess what? They actually change with us adults too. And one thing that I remind people is that getting some kind of solution for whatever mental health challenge you have is not a one and done thing. It's not like you go to therapy and I get my meds and I'm good. No, it's a process. It's a constant process. And I might be fine talking to you all today, and tomorrow I might be a complete mess and need to start from ground zero. So I think when we learn to embrace it as a process of self-discovery, you talked about the layers, Joe, peeling away the layers. It's a beautiful process. And that's where mental illness becomes an asset.
Yeah. And I think also, we have to accept the fact that people learn from analogies and stories and all this. And so when you think about the human body and brain, well, first you must accept the fact that the brain is part of the human body. And, but second is it's just like any vehicle, right? Your body is your vehicle. Your brain is your engine. There's nobody that buys a car and then never one time does any maintenance for it, or they do, but it doesn't last very long. And it's the same way with our bodies and our brains. And so for me, I've long ago, I accepted the fact that I will forever have to engage in therapy, and that is okay. I actually enjoy it. I look forward to it. And now it might go where maybe it's quarterly or it's monthly, or I'm really going through something difficult and I have to go every 1 week or 2 weeks, but I'm always going to go. And I actually accept that. I love it, because when you have a good therapist, when you have someone that understands your story and your life and your struggles and how you think and process, they really can be an asset to your life and help you through things. Because here's the most important piece. You know who's not trained to deal with all of your emotional baggage? Your spouse, your children, your colleagues, your friends, your peers, your boss, your coworker. Most people are not trained in this, and so we unload so often on the people around us and the people that we care for and the people we love, not understanding the fact that they're simply now going to carry all that weight, not knowing how to put it down. That's the value of having a trained therapist, is they can receive it all, just leave it there. And it's not that they don't care about you, but they're not going to hold your baggage like one of your loved ones would. So I think it's important that we understand that.
Yeah, I always bring up an analogy. In the Outback Steakhouse, for those of you that have been to this restaurant, there is an appetizer called the bloomin' onion. And let me explain the bloomin' onion in case you've never seen it. They pierce an onion down the center and they deep fry it. And when this thing comes out, well, first of all, everyone stares at it. And when it comes to the table, it's gone within about 2 minutes. This thing is so good. And we all know that onions have layers, but when it comes out at the Outback Steakhouse, and I'm making myself hungry talking about this, when it comes out, you actually see for a moment how many layers an onion has. Like, you get to see it right there. And that's where I think therapy helps us get to those layers. There's what you know about yourself, what you don't know about yourself, and therapy helps you see what you realize that you didn't know, that you didn't even realize that you didn't know about yourself. And that's where it's a process of self-discovery. So I remind people that it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of growth when you start going to therapy. And also, just one thing I want to bring up, because I know many people out there are thinking about therapy. Maybe some of you are committing. If you're going to commit to it, we'd love to hear in the comments. Let us know that you're committed to going to therapy. But the thing that I wanted to remind people is that sometimes you have a bad experience with a therapist. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. And therapy is kind of like dating, where you have to try a few till you get it right, and you'll know it when it feels right. And to those of you that are out there that maybe went to therapy, that are considering going back, a lot of times people tell me, well, I don't want to have to tell my story all over again. It's too painful. I want to be very honest with you with love. If it's too painful, you need to tell it again, because there's something to learn through sharing that story again. So I really encourage it for everybody.
That's really good, Mike. It's interesting because people I know very close to me have said that they're afraid of the things that are going to have to talk about, right? So that trauma, they're afraid to bring it out. But I think that in of itself is all the sign that the person needs, that they have to see somebody.
Yeah.
And I also found interesting that you're very open about your vulnerability, right? Like, today could be fine, tomorrow we could not be, right?
Yeah.
I'm seeing a therapist every 2 weeks right now. Okay. Right. And before I even came here, I just finished a run. I felt really good. And I come in the house and something just triggered me. Right. And I was welling up and dealing with something like a personal loss I've suffered. And it's always there. Right. And Joe talks about it like it's kind of like a spectrum. Like, we all have mental health, and it's something we all have to care about. And you mentioned it as a process. I think that's really good. Something you said before we came on, and it really resonated with me, man. And I like what you said, is that you kind of pointed out the fact that we are 3 men talking about this subject. We're talking about things like vulnerability. We're talking about mental illness. I'm talking about like crying before I came here. And even Joe points out, right, like, people freak out because, like, we're Marines, we're cops. And then we talk about stuff like this. Like, people are like, what? And you said something very profound, man. And I want you to
What did I say?
go into this, right? You said you found that I want to make sure I get this right. The more you address your feelings, the more you talk about them, the more you understand them, the more masculine you feel. Tell me about that.
Oh, okay. One of my favorite subjects. There's a war going on with men right now. Masculinity, feeling like a real man, and we live in a society that, in many ways, calls masculinity something toxic. But masculinity is just simply a trait, and can be a wonderful thing. And I know for me that I've struggled with my masculinity, and I actually learned about it through my therapist pointing it out, who is a woman. And that didn't rub me the right way when she brought it up. I was in denial about it. But I realized over time, as I began to work through the dark emotions, my insecurities, the times where I feel like less of a man, that it's actually made me feel more secure in my masculinity. The fact that I can openly talk about where I'm losing in life. I'm a high achiever, but there's areas of life where I'm not winning at all, and learning to just embrace that as part of who I am. I actually find myself just walking around just feeling more confident in who I am. And I wish men would do that. A lot of times, we were actually also talking about this beforehand, is that, with men, anger comes out sometimes, right? And anger, as we said, can be depression in disguise. And one thing that I want to say about anger is that anger, I'm learning, is one of the best emotions you can have. In fact, it's one of my favorite. I think it's one of the most positive. We call it a negative emotion, but I'm actually changing that to calling it a difficult emotion. It's difficult because when you don't know how to process it, it becomes hostility. It becomes violence. But when you learn to process anger, it becomes passion. It becomes leadership, decisiveness, sexuality. So learning to take these difficult emotions that I carry with me, sit with them, not only just try to just tolerate them, but run towards them and say, come on, what do you got for me? It's been a powerful lesson for me.
Yeah, I love that, Mike. And I agree with you. Anytime I teach, especially in this topic or this subject, I talk about the responsibility that we have, especially as men, to redefine certain terms. And one of those, because if you look up the definition of resiliency, it's the ability to bounce back from a difficult situation or challenging time. And then the next word is toughness, and it's just thrown in there. And so to me, I think we've done a terrible job, again, oftentimes as men, of creating this idea of what tough means. And being tough does not mean shoving and compartmentalizing and suppressing your emotions and feelings and hiding behind the fact that you're not okay. Toughness is being, regardless of what you are, who you are, what you identify as, it does not matter. Being tough is being willing to stand in your truth despite who's around you or what they might feel or think or believe. That is being tough. And it's okay. It's perfectly acceptable to be a man, as the three of us are identifying right now and communicating to you, and have challenges and have a mental health diagnosis and have sadness and say that, yes, we openly will cry when our body is communicating to us that it's time to cry. And so I think it's important that we all develop at least a very basic understanding of what being emotionally intelligent means. And it's something that we oftentimes just don't understand. What does it mean to be emotionally intelligent? What does it mean to be resilient? What does it mean? And not just always the dictionary definition of these words, but how do we embrace them and live them, fully embody them? So I love what you're saying, Mike. Thank you. Real quick, just we've got some people. Tiffany, I love you, Tiff. You're always around and supporting us. Thank you so much. Cynthia, it's great that you're on here. You love therapy. Good for you. And she says, yes, you have to shop around therapists sometimes. Anytime I recommend someone go to therapy, I always say, don't make a decision until you've had at least 3 to 4 appointments.
Yep.
Because the first couple are always going to be just the demographics and the blah, blah. But to develop a relationship and build trust, you've got to have at least 3 or 4 before you can make a real determination. And then Susan, happy Saturday. We make her feel a lot less lonely. Thanks for being here, Susan. She is everywhere.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. And then Tiff says, emotionally process experiences to diminish or eliminate symptoms from trauma, anxiety, and difficult life experiences. And that's the thing. Processing trauma is something that needs to be taught.
Oh, yes. Can we just talk about that for a second? There's a great book that you all probably know about that is just the trauma Bible. The Body Keeps the Score. And what it talks about is we store emotions in our bodies. If I'm feeling that anger in my chest every time, you're in the room, that's really in my chest, and learning to do that. And there's a style of yoga that I do called yin yoga. I'm not a yoga person. I'm a weight training person. I just don't do yoga. But this style, you just get to sit on the floor and hold positions. And the idea behind it is that you can release trauma that's stored in your joints. When I would go to classes for yin yoga pre-pandemic, people would randomly start crying, just releasing emotions. So it's really important when we talk about this mental health thing to also notice our physical body, where an emotion is coming up. And I got to tell you, at first when I started doing this stuff, it was scary. So even though the three of us are tough because, we're in our truth right here and we're all showing up for our emotions, it's really scary stuff to do for anyone. However, over time, it becomes a real asset when you stick to it.
I think what's really cool, and you're alluding to it right now, is that you have a fundamental understanding of overall wellness, right? And it isn't, I know some people just focus on one or the other. And Joe talks about all the time, and we say it often, is it's a really holistic thing. So the fact that you are discussing how you are using physical exercise to kind of release these emotions, and I think it's very important. And one of the keys to being resilient is being out in nature, going out and do things, working your body out, all those things. So that's very, very important. I kind of want to shift gears right now,
Sure.
Mike. We've had a kind of developing discussion because of our profession and because of how people see it right now. And I couldn't help but notice a YouTube video that you had done. And it seemed like somebody kind of called you out, that you're an advocate and you hadn't spoken much about a subject, particularly racism, and you wanted to talk about how difficult and challenging these things were. And what I liked about it is, and you alluded a little bit to this also when you brought up, how people see masculinity. And what I found is your position on things is what we've been trying to do over the last several weeks, is just foster discussion. And I love that you said that you will purposely put yourself with somebody that thinks differently than you and have discussion. Why is that so important, and how has it been beneficial for you?
Oh, such a great question. It weaves right into what we were discussing. The more I've worked on my emotions, dealt with the difficult, the more secure in myself I've become. So if you absolutely love oranges, that's what you like to eat, and I love apples, and I swear by them, we can coexist. We live in a world now that's very threatened when, people get very threatened when someone thinks different than me. I was asked a question at a presentation once. I love Q&A, by the way. I love being thrown on the spot. I was asked this question at a presentation, thousands of people. Speech went great. And the audience member says, "Mike, I have a problem in my classroom in my school. I got Trump supporters versus non-Trump supporters. What do I do?" And I'm like, uh-oh. This is going to get awkward. But actually, I thanked the person. I thought it was a great question. And one thing I said to him was that the problem isn't politics. The problem is that people feel the need to make someone else wrong. You feel differently. I have to make you wrong and show you how I'm right. However, and I actually believe this started with a show called Jerry Springer way back in the day, if you know that show. And it's fast forwarded to Facebook. We live out the Jerry Springer show on Facebook every day. But the thing is, politics would be a lot different if we talked about it and you shared your point of view. I said, "Tell me more, Jesse. Tell me more about why you feel that way," with the purpose of understanding. And I find that when you do that, you get to really have a connection with people. So when it comes to race, one thing I challenge people to do, all of you listening, is find someone who is a different race than you, who might think differently about race than you, not to make them wrong, not to tell them that they need to start thinking blank, but just to understand and be with them. It's a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah. Funny, I just this week I was teaching a group of first responders, and I told them, I said, if I were to call you one-on-one, because I know people struggle with being honest in front of their peers when they're uncomfortable about things, but if I were to call you out one-on-one and say, "Hey, name me your top 5 friends and tell me about them," and typically a first responder their response is going to be one of two things. One is, I don't have 5 friends, because again, my view of people in the world is that everyone is just annoying, a problem, messed up, and so I just avoid them. The other thing is if as a first responder, your top 5 friends are only other first responders, that's a problem. It's a problem. And even if in your top 5 friends, you have white and black and Asian cops, and that's your 5 best friends, it's still a problem, because you really start to believe that your small circle of people is a fair representation of the universe. And it's not. Right. And so I challenge them to, like, be uncomfortable. Go make friends with someone that is a Trump supporter if you're not a Trump supporter. Go make friends with someone who absolutely despises Trump if you happen to like Trump. Because it absolutely, and that's why I named this show "Speaking to Understand," because I love what you said in your video, Mike. And as I was watching that, as I was online stalking all your stuff, I listened to your video that you were talking about racism, and so for me, it was like, absolutely, this is the whole point: is let's talk about it. And then the point you just used right there on Jesse is like, tell me more about that. Is a classic. Effective communication technique. It really is an active listening. It's what they call a minimal encourager. And hey, tell me more about that, because I want to understand what your point of view is. And it's just like marriage therapy, right? The 2 choices are, do you want to be right or do you want to be in love? And if you're trying to make the other person wrong, both people fail. And so we have to start to see the world that way of, look, how important is it to me to be right? And if I'm going to push so hard to be right, that has to come at a cost. And what does that cost? And inevitably, it means someone else is wrong, which means they're put down, which means they're less than, which means all these things. And it just continues the divide. So I love the fact that we can have these conversations, regardless of what your beliefs are, regardless of all this. And so that brings me into my question, Mike, is no. But I'm curious, just in your life, good, bad, right, wrong, up, down, because I heard in one of your videos, one of your stances. And so, but I'm curious if you've ever had any interactions with law enforcement in your life, good ones, bad ones. Have you interacted with police, and what's your take on that? And then the second one, if you can recall it as you answer, is if you could just provide your response, just because it's such a hot topic of defunding the police and how you feel about that.
Oh, I love you for asking this. Thank you so much for asking this. And thank you for just the work you guys do. I really, really, feel grateful to be here. Yes, I've had interactions with the police where I've gotten pulled over for driving a little too fast, a little too comfortably, I like to say. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times where I've been nervous and I have to run through a checklist in my mind because I read so many stories about violent things that happen with oftentimes white police and Black people. But I also like to talk in terms of facts. And I do know that there are certain statistics that are out there that really talk about that. There are some real issues with racism when it comes to police work and other professions. And I think that's a conversation that we all need to have in every profession. It's not just the police. And at the same time, a few weeks ago, actually it was right after George Floyd was killed, I had, it wasn't an interaction with the police, but we can maybe call it that. I was in the park. I was decided to do work in the park because I needed to get out of the house, tired of the lockdown. And I saw 2 police officers, and I felt bad for them. I felt really bad because police protect us, and police also have challenges with the amount of officers that are murdered, all the time. And one thing I actually said, I got to speak to a group of police officers in Illinois, a state conference. First conference I ever did, by the way, where everyone had firearms in the audience. It was really interesting, by the way. Really interesting to be on that stage. And the thing that I said to them, and I think this is important for people to know, rightfully or wrongfully, when you have to make a choice to use a firearm, I don't know what goes into that decision. I don't know what goes into that decision. And I know that, no matter what, it's never a perfect decision. I'm not making anyone right or wrong here. And I think it's important to know that. And you have to protect your safety. And I think that's really important for people to remember, that there's not just one side of this. When it comes to defunding police, I don't like the term, because I think what people are saying is that certain resources need to be reallocated, but we need you police officers. There's so many times where I see police in New York. I'm grateful. It's like, okay, they're protecting me from something, or they're getting the bad guy here. So I think, and I'm saying this as a Black man who's experienced racism, that yes, racial issues do exist in the world. We need to address that. Life has never been perfect. And at the same time, we need police officers. You all put your life on the line every day. And I just want to say, as an American citizen, thank you for the work you do, and thank you for protecting us.
Well, that was quite the answer, man. Thank you for doing that. I'm a little speechless right now, only because I have 947 thoughts that are coming through my head. And so one of the things that I'm working on personally is learning how to be far more concise, because I tend to just talk a lot because I speak as I think. And so I'm admitting that I have a lot of thoughts coming through my head. But I love your response, because I also agree with everything that you're just saying. And, you know, right or wrong, and I know it's not popular, but what I appreciate most about what you just shared, Mike, is the fact that when it comes to using a firearm, when it comes to a deadly force encounter, you don't know what goes into that. And you're admitting that because you aren't in that position. Yet so many people, and this is a problem within law enforcement, because I can at least see it from both ways, but so many people in law enforcement will not even take the opportunity to listen to anyone that isn't in law enforcement for that reason, because it's like, of course you have an opinion. You've never been in this position. Of course you're making these laws these ways. You've never been in this position. Of course you're going to do those things. You've never been in our role. And so it's like, well, so then should the police officers be the one that make all of the laws and rule and all that? Probably not. Should people who aren't police officers be trained on how to carry a gun? And because here's what we know too, and this just happened here. This is a real example in San Antonio. An incredible guy named Doug Green. He was telling me about some activists that were heavily involved with some protests that were happening, and they invited them to come be a part of this inclusion training, and they put them through some scenarios. Now, these are scenarios on a screen, like through a Milo simulator, like one of our partners, and they shoot, don't shoot scenarios. And he told me that they actually broke down, and they had this realization of like, I had no idea what you guys went through, and they apologized, and they said, I'm sorry. That was just one encounter, one experience, one training opportunity. And it was so profound for them. And I thought it was so powerful that he shared that, because I'm thinking like, man, if there was a way that we could actually educate people. And then I'll end with this part because I am long-winded. But when I did my TEDx talk, I had a lady come up to me after. She was an older Black woman, and she came up to me and said, she started kissing my hand, and she was like, I love you. I love you. I love you. But I hate you. And I was like, okay, please explain. And she said, you know, I've raised my boys who are now teenagers. I've raised them to fear the police. And I tell them every time they take the trash out to the street to make sure their hoodies are off and to make sure they come back inside and just do that one chore and get back inside. And of course it breaks my heart, because I'm like, why do we have to teach this? Why do we have to perpetuate this? And she said, but you know, Joe, I never realized that police officers were human beings, but being completely genuine. And I was like, and I'll be honest, I had judgments, and I was like, what the hell, man? Like, what is this? And then she gives me her card, and she's actually a child physician. She was a PhD, and she was a national speaker on teen suicide prevention. And her statement to me was, I had no idea that police officers were human beings that struggled and would go home to their families as well. That is a sad reality for someone. It does me no good to judge it and be like, that's stupid. That's ignorant. No, that's your reality. And that was created from something. And so we have to be willing to understand those challenges that we're facing. And so I appreciate you saying what you said, Mike, and owning the fact that like, hey, that's not my wheelhouse. I don't know what goes into that. And so why would I have this like really rigid opinion about it? So thank you.
Thank you.
And how do we get here, right? How did this happen? And I love how your thought process works, because your thought process in of itself is inclusive. And I think a lot of us are in this society now where we can choose who we can see on our social media.
Yep.
We can choose which intake of news is going to be come in. We can choose, who we're going to allow to be friends with or not. And whenever there's disagreement, most often people shut it off. So we end up all just seeing one perspective of life, just like a circle of friends. If you magnify this, through social media means, which really, really makes the world small, and your small world now through social media is only people that think like you. And I think that's how we get locked into this problem. And I also find it interesting, right? You said that people want to be right more than anything. And there's people out there that will spend all their time just waiting to see something that they want to debate or argue with. And we can't get any discussion done that way. So I love the fact that you have a platform and that you're teaching people to think logically. And not only do you talk about emotions, but to think and how to share and how to communicate. You're doing really, really good things, man. I just wanted to say that. Thanks for your perspective.
Well, thank you. And can I just add to that? I think just such a great conversation that we're having here. I think there's a beautiful opportunity right now. That's the thing that I hope people see from this discussion and other discussions, that the police have an opportunity, especially the police that don't want to hear the public's perspective or are nervous and understandably so about their job and getting defunded. There's an opportunity to have a real conversation and educate. Imagine many police departments throughout this country if they sat down, maybe even with groups of Black people, and just said, we want to have a discussion and just understand you and you understand us. Wow, a lot could happen right there. A lot could happen.
Yeah. So and so this is actually happening. I've seen in the last week or two, there was two. It's escaping my mind right now. There's two cities that have done this inclusion training, where they are bringing in groups of people of color, as they put it in the article, to educate the officers about cultural competency, right? Because really what it comes down to, and again, I had this realization with a show that we did a few weeks ago with Tut, Jesse, and what I was talking about is, we don't do a good enough job vetting, not only hiring the officers to become cops. Like, okay, we hire you, now you go through the training, you become a cop, but then like what amount of effort, if any, in my experience is there's none, but what amount of effort, if any, is put into actually deciding who's going to go work what areas of town? Because one of the disconnects I've seen is you get these super gung-ho, the most motivated type officers that are like, I want to go where the excitement is. Well, where's the excitement? It's typically in the marginalized communities. It's typically in the oppressed neighborhoods. It's typically in the areas that have the highest level of crime. So now you have the most eager officers, usually the younger ones, wanting to go into the marginalized communities where there's higher rates of crime, and there's going to be a collision. And it's like, we don't have to wonder about that anymore. What if we actually said, well, we're going to take this officer who has 20 years of experience, and we're going to put them, now it's not perfect, but they're probably far less impulsive. They probably have much more life experience and job experience. And then we're going to put them in these areas. Also, what if we put officers who came from those communities and looked like they were a representative or a representation of those communities? There's so many things that we can talk about. And Mike, what I appreciate about you, and Jesse was talking about this, and I just want to make this point, because sometimes we catch some stuff for this, is it's like people are offended by the fact if you aren't hard right, hard left, hard for, hard against, you have to be like extreme on one side or the other. But I don't agree with that. And no. Jesse and I are not. And so it's, and I appreciate, because I see that you're not that way either. It's like, no, the real work is going to be done in the middle. And it's the people in the middle who have the most level mind who are going to be able to pull the people from the edges in. And so I appreciate that. And I think that's what, and I'm looking at the time and I'm like, we're coming up on 40 minutes. Like, no, we're just getting started.
Can I actually ask you a real question here, because it's been on my mind, and I think this is actually a really good opportunity. And I'm going to try to phrase this nice and concisely, because I know we're coming up on time here.
I'm good.
I was in Chicago for the first time several years ago, and I was speaking at a conference, and I decided to, as a Black man, very important here to just be clear, to go for a walk. I said, I'm done with my event. I feel good. I'm going to go walk around Chicago. And I get about 5 blocks into wherever I'm walking to from this hotel, and I'm like, oh no. No. I don't want to be in this area of town. And I quickly walked back. And I reflected on what happened that day, because it was really important, and what I'm about to say here. If a white person would have done that and said, I went out, didn't like that part of town. I went back to my hotel. They might be considered a racist. I felt unsafe. The lesson that both of us can learn, though, is that we can deeply reflect on those feelings that came up and why through therapy, through doing the deep work. And I wish more people would do that. And I bring that up because that's the kind of debate that we need to have, not even debate, just conversation, I should say, about like what goes into those types of situations. And for either one of us, something could have escalated and we could have labeled it as this or that. And I think it's just really important that we examine those deep seated things that we carry.
I love the fact that you are discussing labeling things, right? Like that's very common here. People jump quite quick to label that a certain thing. And I think a lot of people, or maybe our culture is in such a way that we lament, we need injustice. It has to be there. That's what we seek. More importantly is, I think one thing that you brought up, Mike, that's probably most important in this whole conversation is using therapy to explore emotions and thoughts. Yeah. And I think that we are, and we shouldn't be, we're miles away from it, but that's something that people need to hear and know.
Well, Jesse, you're right. And I think also to Mike's point is, instead of labeling everything, even as like, well, because again, Mike's words were, if you had that same experience as a white man and said, oh no, bad part of town, I'm leaving. Well, you must be racist because you feared this thing. But what if we actually, instead of labeling things, we focused on labeling the emotion? Ooh. And we just left it there. Like, what if we just labeled the emotion? Because isn't that an equalizer? Because then it's not about like, well, Mike's black and I'm white. It's like, no, Mike was afraid and so was I. Now, instead of being different, we're the exact same, because we shared the same emotion. That is a great, great place to start. Here's the other beauty of it. It's free. You don't have to go to therapy. I mean, you do have to have some insight, but like, what if we got to that point? What if we got to the point where it was like, I'm not going to label this as right, wrong, good, bad, scary, unscary, racist, not, bigot. No. I'm feeling afraid.
Wow.
Could you join me there? I don't know.
Well, what would happen is nobody would be on their mobile devices. People would just be pausing on the street and reflecting. I mean, that'd be so weird, But the thing that I want to say, and by the way, thank you to all these lovely comments. I appreciate all of you. The thing that I wanted to also bring up with that, though, it's like we need bias, though, in life. You need to know right from wrong. You need to know the difference between something that's a threat and not a threat. And I think what happens is, people don't realize is when we don't become aware of the biases that we have, and they just, stay there in our minds, we don't even realize them. That's when we get into some of these tough situations. So bias is needed. Please know that you need to stop when you see a stop sign. That's an important bias that we all should have. And at the same time, we should just be aware of what biases are there. And that's the best we can do. I really appreciate you guys talking about this.
Yeah. And Mike, I think you'll appreciate this. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Susan David. She's also done a big TED, but she says that our emotions are not directives, they're data. And so if people would understand what that means, like your emotions are communicating something to you, but they don't mean that you have to act on them. They're not directing you to do anything, but how many people right now are responding emotionally? And what we know about the brain is that when the emotional mind is high, our rational mind and behaviors are low, and it usually creates a problem or a storm or a collision or a just terrible, terrible situation. So understand that the emotions are there to serve a purpose. The more we know about them, the better we are as people. The better we are as people, the better we are as a society. And yeah, I mean, I know it catches a lot of like heat, but one of the worst things about this whole COVID-19 pandemic, and yes, obviously it's taking lives and all that, but the fact that we have been pushed away from actual physical connection, the fact that we can't embrace each other, I mean, it really is having a pretty significant impact, I think, on people. And I'm terrified about what's going to happen when schools reopen. Even if they do the first month virtually, eventually they're going to go back to school, and all these orders and rules in place of like keeping distance and don't touch. And like, it's just gonna, I'm concerned about the overall impact that that's going to have, because we are meant to be connected. We absolutely are meant to be connected and embrace each other. So
We need hugs. And speaking of connection, I have to ask the both of you on this live stream. I'm going to ask you right now. You can totally say no. I get hired sometimes to speak in Texas. Love coming to Texas. Can't wait to travel there again, and hope you guys get well soon with everything that we went through here in New York. Been to San Antonio, actually. I think it was in January. So the next time I come to San Antonio and we're allowed to socialize, can I hang out with the two of you?
Hold on. Let me ask Jesse real quick. Whatever, man. Come on.
I can handle rejection. I can sit with my emotions.
No, there will be no rejection. Absolutely, man. And here's again, I'm from New York, and so luckily we get to travel around quite a bit. It's getting busier. Things are starting to open back up. So I would hope for the same. Anytime I'm back up in the Northeast, and it's realistic to get together, I would love to meet with you and hang out. Again, I'm excited about this relationship. I think that there's things that we can also do together. Yeah. Because again, and I mentioned this before the show, and I'm going to say it again, regardless if people are offended by it. But I said, hey, Mike, I don't know if you realize this or not, but one of the other beauties about us being three men talking about our feelings is you're Black, I'm white, and Jesse's Hispanic. Can you even believe it? And and so I think it's important, right? Because it just proves that it is possible. Yeah. It is possible when we're willing. And so I just invite people to join us in conversation. So go ahead, Jesse. I know you got something coming up, buddy.
F-yes, Mike, is what I was going to say. Is F-yes. That's my response. No, man. So I'm fanning pretty hard right now, man. I think I developed a man crush, right? So this is what I want to say, right? The whole purpose of our organization, the whole purpose of doing the show is to learn how to be better humans. If I had to simplify it as best as possible. And I think you have been very representative of the process, the insight, the work, all of those things. And I'm proud to have you on, man. You're a great human to know, and we do need to hang out. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely.
All right, Jesse, I guess we're at 46 and a half minutes or so. I love this dialogue. And Mike, here's what I want to commit, or at least ask. I want to offer. Every now and again, we've had a guest where people are like, we need a part two. We need a part two. We've never done it. I think we need a part two, and I actually want to commit to that. And so maybe in a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, we can get on your schedule and have you back on, because there's really not only. Here's what I don't want to do is just keep talking about the problem. I love when people are solution based, and it's part of why we have our name. And so I think the more we dialogue and the more we really start to unpack this, I think it'll start helping people. And I think there's an opportunity here. And so I would love to have you back on as a guest if you would do that.
I would absolutely love to be on, and I agree with solutions as well. And I think what you're doing is really great here. And you're right. This is all about humanity and just being better humans. And that's why I just encourage everyone watching. I want to part with a few words here, if that's okay with you. There's a great marketing blogger, and his name is Seth Godin. And one of the things he says about marketing, totally different subject, right, is that when we, identify with a product that we love, we basically are saying to ourselves, people like us do things like this. Oh, you like burgers? I like burgers. We go to the burger joint down the street. We're fans of it. And we don't even realize that we do that. We say that to ourselves all the time. People like us do things like this. And I think that simple awareness of just remembering that is really, really important. And I encourage all of you out there to just think about this process of sitting with your emotions and just think about what's coming up. You don't need to judge it or run away from it. And I know that's very scary for many of you, but I promise you, as someone who struggled for 4 years, attempted suicide, self-harmed, been out of control, I'm using the H word nowadays, happy. And it's a great place to be. And I promise you all, that is possible.
So you kind of burst my balloon there, because I
do it anyway,
right? What I normally do, right, is I like to, when we close a show, I like to put the guest on the spot.
So I messed up the closing.
No, it's perfect, right? But I think you got more in the tank, furthermore, right? So I'm going to come back to you. But I also want to say is marketing isn't so far off, because we talk about a lot of things on the show. It always comes back to central mental health, right? But we have a lot of we're entrepreneurs, Joe and I, right? We're social entrepreneurs, moreover. So I think there's plenty of room to talk about, and we can get into business and all that on the next episode. And I think people want to even see you drum. So we're going to work all this in.
Okay.
But I like to close the show with the guest being put on the spot. Is there anything that you want the audience to leave with? A quote, a thought, anything that you want to pass on? It sounds like you started it already, but I don't think you're a guy that runs out of words, man. I really don't. So
Well,
I'm going to give you your moment now.
I'm going to say this, and this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to say it nicely and with love. Don't just sit with your feelings. I think that's come up a lot today, is sitting with your feelings. Start chasing your feelings, especially those uncomfortable and overwhelming ones. There is a great gift behind it if you do that. And I can just say, as someone from experience who's been through so much with it, that the other night when I was angry beyond belief, the opportunity to just sit in the living room and hang with my anger was one of the best things I could have done for myself. And I have seen it change people's lives when they do that. So happiness is possible. Emotional wellness is possible. And that's what I have to say on the spot.
Thank you for that. I knew you did. And that was, I mean, awesome. And as a person that their depression manifests through anger and through isolation and cutting up people that are close to me off, I got to admit, I don't have it all figured out. And Joe and I come up here and talk, and people sometimes assume that, because we're able to do the work in law enforcement and make these amazing outcomes happen in the most dire situations, and we're able to help people, and we talk these talks, that we have it all figured out, and we don't. And I love the fact that this show was about human beings and the process they go through and learning. I learned something today, and I'm going to put it into practice. So I encourage all of you guys to do the same. There was a lot of good things today. I don't think I can top anything or leave anything other than thank you. I'm grateful for the show. I'm going to go out and say that this is probably, for me, the best show we've had. So I encourage all of you guys to watch it again, share it, like it, comment, everything. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, man. Yeah, so I am beyond excited. Mike came on 15 minutes before we went live. And again, we tried to have a conversation yesterday. It got interrupted by tall trees. And so we really just met for the first time today. And I mean, I've watched his videos, I've seen him, but I just knew, as I imagined did Jen McShane, to make this introduction, that there was going to be something pretty powerful and impactful. I really believe that this needs to be an ongoing conversation where we can all learn from each other. But my going away for you today is to remember that your soul is dyed by the color of your thoughts. It's a Marcus Aurelius quote. I love it. And we have to accept the fact that our thoughts really do determine our happiness. And so if you want to live a fulfilled, happy, prosperous life, which I get has different definitions for different people, consider what your thoughts are. And that's what I have. Mike, you're a beautiful man. I appreciate you doing this. I cannot wait to, again, I want to lock it in, man. So maybe like 3 weeks out, we'll talk offline, but I want to get it in because I think, yeah, the comments are there. The support's going to be there. We're going to push this out. We'll get it shared, but I want to have this continued dialogue. And I look forward to not just meeting you in person, but really working with you and creating a significant impact. So I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.